Hey y'all! In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off in my last video, where I introduced setting your Z0 position to the material surface versus setting it to the machine bed. In this video, we're going to combine the two in the same file, and we're going to do that by taking advantage of sheets which became available in version 11.0 and newer. I'm also going to demonstrate this in version 10 of the software so you can see how to do it without taking advantage of sheets. But for now, we're going to start in version 11.5. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you my job setup. I have my material width set at 7 1/8 of an inch. My height in Y is 15 7/8 long. And I have the Z0 position set to the material surface. My XY datum is in the correct location, and my modeling resolution is high. This barn star doesn't have a lot of detail in it, so I don't need any resolution higher than that. Now I'll click OK. Now the next thing I want to do is go straight into my Sheets tab, and I'm going to rename this sheet Material Surface. Now I want to come down here and click Add New, and it's going to add a new sheet with identical dimensions, and I'm going to name this one Machine Bed. Now I want to make sure the name Machine Bed is highlighted over here. I'm going to come straight down and click Edit. That's going to open up the Edit Sheet form. Looks very much like Job Setup. But here, the width and height and thickness should be identical to the other sheet. I'm going to change my Z0 position to the machine bed. Everything else is going to remain the same. Then I'll click OK. So I have two separate sheets. One with the Z0 position at the material surface, the other with the Z0 position at the machine bed. Now, to set up this file, I want to go into the material surface sheet. So we see it's in bold. That's the active sheet. I'm going to come down into my clip art, go into my 3D models, and I'm going to select the barn star that I used in the first part of this series. And again, if you missed the video where I created this barn star in Aspire, I'll put a link to it down in the description of this video and another link in a card up here right about now. Now I'm going to go over to my modeling tab, and I'm going to resize this star because it's wider than my material. So with it selected, I'll come up here to set selected object size, and I'm going to set it to 6.5 inches wide in X, and click Apply. Now I'm going to drag it up here close to the top, and just to make room for another star down below. But before I do that, I'm going to go into the properties of this star. And I'm going to take a look at it here. My shape height is 0.4. I'd like it to be a lot thicker than that. That's less than 1/2 inch thick, and I'm using 3/4 inch thick material. So I'm going to change it to 0.7. Give the software a chance to catch up, and everything else is okay. I'm going to leave it as is. Now, still in the modeling tab, and with the stars still selected, I'm going to come right over here, and I'm going to draw a vector boundary around that star. So now I have the star out here, and I have my vector boundary. On this sheet, this vector is going to be the machining boundary. Now I want to create a copy of the star and this vector and place it down here so I can cut two stars out of the same piece of material. So I've already got the vector selected. I'll hold down Shift and click on the star. Then I'm going to click it once again to go into move and transform mode. Then I'm going to put my cursor right over this center square here, hold down the control button on my keyboard, left click and drag another star and vector straight down here. Then release both the control button and my left mouse button. So now I have 2 barn stars and 2 boundary vectors. Let's go back to these boundary vectors for just a second. And this is where we take advantage of sheets in the newer versions of the software. I'm going to select this vector. I'm going to hold down Shift and select this vector. I don't want either of the stars selected. Then I'm going to right click, copy to sheet, machine bed. And now we see when I activate this sheet, I have the 2 boundary vectors over here. These vectors are going to be used for my profile cutout toolpath. These over here, I'm going to do a 3D roughing and 3D finishing toolpath, machining to this vector on both of these stars. My Z0 is set to the material surface here and the machine bed over here. Now we can calculate some toolpaths. So let's start with my machine bed material. We'll go over to the toolpaths tab, and I'm going to select both stars and both vectors, and I'm going to do a 3D roughing toolpath. That automatically puts me into material setup. My material setup has my material thickness, my XY datum, my Z0 position at the material surface. Now, if we look down here, I have a gap below the model of about 50 thousandths of an inch. I want to bring that down. I want to carve into the material before the star starts. That way I avoid any possibility of a flat spot up here on the tip. So let's bring this gap down to, so now I'm going to leave 3 thousandths of an inch of material down here, but it's going to carve down about 0.047 before it actually starts carving the star. And my safe Z is good, my home position is good. I'll click OK. And that's going to bring me over to the 3D roughing toolpath. Now I've got my stars and my vectors selected. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch 2 flute upcut end mill to rough the star. I'm going to machine to the selected vector right here, and I'm going to use a boundary offset of 0.25. That is the same diameter as my roughing bit, because I want that bit to come out here and clear out a spot for the ball nose. I'm going to use a machining allowance of 0.03, meaning it's going to leave about that much material behind to allow the ball nose to clean that up. I'm going to use a Z-level strategy, and I'm just going to call this 3D roughing. And I'll calculate. Now I can preview, and there is my roughing toolpath. I'll close this, go back into my 2D view, and with all the same vectors selected, I'll do a 3D finishing toolpath using my 1/8 inch tapered ball nose bit. Again, going to the same vector boundary with the same boundary offset. And we'll just call this 3D finish. And we'll calculate that toolpath. And I'll go ahead and preview those. Okay, now we need to pay attention to what we're doing here. Here in the preview window, I'm going to put my cursor right over this flat spot that was created by that end mill. If we look at my DROs that will show up down here, we can see I'm about 0.747, 7469, 747. I'm going to remember that number, and I'm going to use that as my start depth for my profile cutout. So I can go ahead and close this and go into my 2D view and switch over to my machine bed toolpath. I'll select both of these vectors, do a profile toolpath, and I'm going to set a start depth of 0.747. Then I'm going to set a cut depth of Z minus 0.747, then tap the equals button. This is telling this calculator to take the Z thickness of my material and subtract that start depth. And that's going to give me a depth of cut of 0.03 of an inch. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch down cut 2-flute end mill. It will do it in one pass. I'm going to machine outside of the vectors. I don't need to do a separate last pass. It's only cutting 0.03 of an inch. I'm not going to use tabs simply because of the way I'm mounting this material. And I'm going to come down and call this profile cutout. Now I'll calculate it. I can preview this, and we'll go ahead and do that now, but it's not going to show the 3D carve because that's on a separate sheet. But you can see here what it's going to leave behind. That is those 2 stars. Now I can save G-code, copy it to my flash drive, take it outside, and start cutting on the CNC router. Now over here in version 10.0, I have the exact same models, and I have the exact same vectors as I just demonstrated in 11.5. I have made my modifications by increasing the model thickness. I have them sized, and I have them placed where I want them. I then made sure to go in and save as, and I named it version 10 material surface, just so I wouldn't confuse this file with my version 11.5 file. Now let me show you job setup here. We have the identical sized material. My Z0 position is at the material surface. None of this has changed. This file is ready for me to calculate toolpaths and save G-code to do a 3D roughing and 3D finishing toolpath to carve these stars. It is crucial that you have this geometry ready to go, ready to calculate toolpaths, and ready to save G-code before you move on to this next step. With this completed and ready to go, I do one final save. Then I immediately come up and do a save as. And this one I'm going to rename. I'm going to rename this one Machine Bed and save it. So now in my folder, I have version 10 material surface and version 10 machine bed. Now something to pay attention to is the title of the file you're working in. I'm working in the machine bed. I'm going to be using these vectors for my profile cutout. As such, I don't need these stars. I can delete them. Then I want to go over here to Job Setup, and now I want to change my Z0 position to the machine bed. Click OK. Once again, save the file. I'm now ready to calculate the toolpath for my profile cutout, the same as I did in the previous version. The crucial thing to remember is make sure you're working in the correct file. But other than that, this is the only difference between using sheets in version 11.0 and newer and using two separate files in version 10.5 and older. Just make sure that you're working with the correct file before you calculate those toolpaths and save G-code. I have already done that, so let's go outside onto the CNC router and let's carve these barn stars. Okay, out here on the CNC, I have homed to the machine. I have done my spindle warm-up procedure. I have my material mounted to the spoil board. I'm in my G55 work offset position. I have my first G-code loaded, which is the 3D roughing toolpath with my Z0 position set to the material surface. Okay, the 3D curves are done. So now I'm going to move my gantry out of the way. And in an attempt to try to mimic my setup here as much as I can, I'm going to move over here, put down a couple of layers of painter's tape. And this is just to mimic the thickness of these two layers of painter's tape underneath the piece of MDF that I'm carving these barn stars out of. So now when I go to set my Z0 position to the machine bed, I'll actually be setting it to two thicknesses of the painter's tape. As you can see, I'm not going to put the CA glue here, so that's the only variable that I'm going to have because I don't know how much glue I put down between these two layers. So I'll just put my touch plate up here, do my bit change, and then set my Z0 to this surface here which should give me approximately the same thickness as these 2 layers of tape and this layer of MDF. Okay, move the camera up here closer. Let's move the gantry out of the way so we can get an unobstructed view. And this is what it looks like when it cuts through. Now, you can see the blue tape here. And there's a few places where it did skin through. I guess that CA glue is thicker than I gave it credit for. But you know what? I'll take it. There's going to be a little bit of cleanup sanding, not a lot. Again, I'll take it. So here are the 2 barn stars that you just watched me cut out on the Avid CNC. And yes, for those of you who are wondering, they are exactly the same size, exactly the same shape. So, what did we learn over the course of these 2 videos? Well, we learned several things. Number 1, we learned to check your axis calibration before you do anything. But setting that aside, we also learned when it's appropriate to set your Z0 position to the machine bed and when it's more appropriate to set it to the material surface. Now, it would be very easy to say, well, always set your Z0 to the machine bed when you're doing this toolpath or that toolpath, and always set it to the material surface when you're doing this toolpath and this toolpath. But I think there's a little bit more nuance to that. It's going to depend on the project that you're creating and what the priority is. If you're drilling a hole, for example, and it's important that that hole be a specific depth below the surface of that material, then setting your Z0 to that material surface is the appropriate place. Now, if you're drilling all the way through the material and don't want to go way into your spoil board, then the machine bed would be the appropriate place to set your Z0 position. Generally speaking, if you're V-carving or pocketing to a specific depth from the material surface, then the material surface should be where you set your Z0 position. And there are lots of other situations where one is better than the other. So use your judgment. Preview early, preview often is what I like to say. And if you need something to a certain depth from the machine bed, use the machine bed. If you needed a certain depth from the material surface, use the material surface. And as we've demonstrated, it can be both, whether it's the same file or 2 different files if you're using an older version of the software. Now, we've gone through a lot of information, and I know there's no way that I answered every question you're going to have on the topic. So, this afternoon, at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, I'll be hosting a live Q&A session where you can ask me any question you'd like about this topic or any topic in any of my previous videos. Again, that's this afternoon at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on my YouTube channel, and I've put a link to that live Q&A session down in the description box of this video. So I hope you got something out of this series, and if you did, I do hope you'll give these videos a thumbs up. And if you'd like to follow along in my further CNC adventures, I do hope you'll subscribe to my channel. Now, before we wrap this up, I'd like to say a special thank you to all of my channel members. And remember, channel members, check the community tab here on my YouTube channel for the link to this Monday's members only live stream. If you'd like information on how to become a channel member, just click that little join button down there by the subscribe button. A panel will pop up and a video will play that'll tell you all about channel membership. So, I hope to see everybody this afternoon for the live Q&A session. And as always, whether you subscribe to my channel or not, whether you become a channel member or not, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch. Y'all take care.